At its best, this Skitarii anti-tank ranger build can wreck all manner of armored enemies in as little as 2 shots. A weapon that would have otherwise struggled to deal with carapace armor can now break through it like cardboard. But even when you aren't at your peak, taking them down in about 3 shots isn't too shabby either. Hello Varlets. Today's build was inspired because I was recently watching Attack on Titan again, and I came across a certain scene where a certain anti-Titan rifle was being used. Looking at that, I thought to myself, could I make an anti-Titan build for the Skitarii in DARKTIDE? What we have today is the result of that idea. This build was put together to serve one clear purpose: destroy armored enemies, especially against carapace armored crushers. When I did the Galvanic Rifle overview video, one of the key weaknesses you might have noticed is that its carapace damage wasn't very good. But because it still had a very good weak spot and critical multiplier, there was always a chance that I could assemble something to overcome that weakness. And assembled I did. To give you a bit more information about it, while this build is designed as an anti-tank ranger, it can still hold its own in melee combat when we need to. So this build is technically a bit of a generalist that can flex between the front and back lines of a team. This is something you're going to need to be comfortable with because ammo can be a bit of an issue at times with the Galvanic Rifle. For now, let's move on to the weapon selection. As shown, the Galvanic Rifle will be the featured weapon of the build. I've already done a deep dive into it, so if you want to learn more about it, feel free to check that video out. Now, perk-wise, I'm putting on carapace damage because this is the main armor type we are looking to destroy. The Galvanic Rifle already deals with flak armor very well on its own, and its high base damage means we can body shot shooters without needing to invest any more into it. I've also chosen to take reload speed, a choice you don't often see, but here's my reasoning. This build already has a lot of buffs piled onto the burst damage per shot. In fact, some of the highest numbers I've seen when the stars are aligned can reach between 3008 to 5000 damage per shot. Adding more and more damage probably isn't going to help anymore. Instead, adding more reload speed helps our slow 3.85 second reload a bit, which helps our sustained damage output, something far more valuable to a weapon which only has 8 rounds. For blessings, we are taking opening salvo for that near constant 20% strength with practically every shot we make. I'm also choosing Headhunter for the boost to critical chance for those juicy critical weak spot numbers. I think this combination provides the most consistent damage output that we need to reliably fill the anti-tank role for this build. For our melee weapon, you'll probably want something that is flexible enough to deal with groups of enemies and even single targets if need be. The Galvanic Rifle's innate weakness of low ammo is something that is going to be a bit of a problem. There will be moments, especially in Havoc, where you will need to pivot into melee to keep contributing to the team. So what better weapon than the Transonic Blades, which can deal with both group clear and single target damage with its unique weapon special that allows you to swap between them. For perks, I'm taking both Flak and Maniac damage for the broadest application of problem solving. Melee bruisers, mutants, and Drake Ragers are what you'll find yourself going into melee combat for, so we'll want to be prepared for that. As for blessings, I'm taking Shred for the increased critical chance. The Transonic Blades are a crit weapon after all, and can benefit from scoring more crits as a damage source. I've also chosen Savage Sweep for this build because fighting back hordes of Poxwalkers is something you might have to do when ammo is low. While I don't expect this build to be the main frontline vanguard, it should be good enough to serve efficiently on short notice. Finally, for Curios, I'm still experimenting to see what works best for the class, but I found what I've been using so far to be good enough. I've got 2 toughness and 1 health setup for the time being. This gives a good balance of toughness to work with and a decent health pool to fall back on. For perks, I'm taking cooldown ability regen, gunner resistance, 2 revive speed, and a single stamina regen perk. Cooldown ability regen works on our charges by reducing the cooldown per charge from 50 seconds down to 44. This means our capacitance generation has a smaller battery to fill before we can get a charge. Gunner resistance might seem a bit overkill, but having that 48% resistance or so is incredibly helpful, and I find the most common enemy I go down trying to fight are Reapers and Gunners. This is the safety net to give me time to react and get out of the way. Revive speed is to help revive and free allies effectively without needing to solely depend on the Servo Skull. And finally, stamina regen to recover our stamina a little quicker. This would be the most useful when we are engaging in melee combat. So, with all our equipment sorted out and the role we need to fulfill in the team established, we can see how the talent wheel comes together and understand the logic and reasoning behind the choices made here. To do that, I'm going to construct the talent wheel and break down each of the areas that make the build function. I would recommend sitting through it because there are concepts and ideas that you can definitely take from this build and implement them into others as well. Hello Varlets. So, for the talent selection build, I'm going to do this kind of live here to walk you through my logic and thinking about how the entire thing comes together. The reason for this is because there's a lot of components going on, and this is a relatively new class with a lot of exploration still happening. So things might change in the future, but for now, what I've put together is effective enough to run on Havoc 40. So there's that. Now, this build is split into three parts. It's going to be this section here, the middle, and the right. So that's the utility support build, the electrocution section, and the range support. There's going to be nothing down in the melee. Now for this, we're going to start with the middle first because it is the quote-unquote engine of the build that makes this whole anti-tank ranger work. We're going to start with auto repair doctrines. This is one of the most powerful toughness regeneration nodes in the game. The only other talent that comes close is probably the veterans one. Well, technically the veteran heals more. It's like 5% per second, but it turns off when you are engaged in melee combat or when you're hit by melee attacks. This is just permanently on all the time, so it's really good. We also take galvanized coating. This is also a very good value node from this tree here. 15% damage resistance at the cost of losing 5% capacitance is a very good trade. 5% capacitance is only 2.5 seconds cooldown increase. And in the higher levels, you can tank no more than maybe 3 or 4 hits. So even if you get hit all the way down, you only lose maybe 10 seconds of your charge, which is not too bad because this is 15% resistance to both melee and range damage. That's the important part there, which means your toughness is a lot more tougher. So from here, we're going to pick up these three nodes here. This diamond shape is going to be the main core of the build, the loop that forms. And to start the loop is going to be voltaic emitter as well as voltaic arcs. So how all of this comes together is that when you activate voltaic emitter, you will release a discharge in a 12-meter radius around you, which will apply electrocution to all enemies. When enemies are electrocuted, they will take a system shock debuff, which applies 10% brittleness onto all of them. And because they are electrocuted, Retribution Conduit will allow you to deal 10% more damage to them, as well as Weakness Analysis Doctrine, which also deals 10% more damage. So in that brief 2 seconds that they are electrocuted, they are now taking more damage from System Shock, and you are dealing more damage to them, 20% right now. If you hit them with Voltaic Arcs, or if a Voltaic Arc chains onto them, they will be applied another stack of brittleness from System Shock. This pushes it up to 20% brittleness, and you deal 20% more damage. So this is a loop that works for all weapons. You can do this for any weapon you want. This scales better with weapons that have high finesse multipliers, like the Galvanic Rifle. But as an engine loop that allows all weapons to be viable against armor, this is where it all happens. From here, I'm also going to pick up Voltaic Motivator. I'll talk more about this in a moment once we complete the rest of the build. So this is all it is for this middle section here. This is the Voltaic engine that allows us to deal with crushers. But this on its own is not enough. What we need to do is then branch over to the left side here. We'll start by taking Power Redistribution Uplink. This is here to help regen some toughness, but more importantly, the most useful part of this is going to be the toughness damage reduction. I'm also going to take Target Prioritization Psalms. Now, I'm going to take everything up to this point first and then explain my decision for this. Technically, to reach this point, because we want to get into the keystone for redline capacitors, I can take Residual Current Buffer, which is what you should logically do, because 10% toughness damage reduction is really good and it's on all the time. And this can further scale up based on how many charges you have. But personally, I like information in the game, and DARKTIDE can be very hectic at times. And I don't like using mods like Spider Sense to tell me where specials are, because it kind of breaks the immersion a little bit. So I like target prioritization to give me that information to tell me where specials are. And because it's about 12.5 meters and Voltaic emitter is also 12 meters, this lets me know if there's anything that's dangerous in front of me, like a trapper, for example, that needs to be dealt with, or a dog. So this is the reason why I take target prioritization psalms. You can take residual current buffer, but this is my choice. So all of that is going to lead into red line capacitors here. The reason why we take red line capacitor is twofold. The first is the most important one, which is it allows us to take capacitory limit override. This gives us 15% rending, which is incredibly good for high finesse weapons. And this is up all the time as long as you can maintain 3 stacks of red line capacitors. The second reason why we take red line capacitor is because it opens up voltaic emitter to be used multiple times. What do I mean by this? You see, voltaic emitter will always use as many charges as it can up to its limit of 3. So if you have 3 charges, you will consume all of it to give you all the final level buff, which is to apply electrocution to all your attacks. But if you have red line capacitor, you have 4 stacks max. That means at best, voltaic emitter will consume 3 charges and leave you with 1. And 1 charge is all we need to activate our two-shot kill threshold for crushers. Because as long as we can do the loop, which is to apply the shockwave, the arc lightning to activate system shock and these two nodes here, we can two-shot crushers consistently. This is why we take red line capacitors. But the reason why I've taken Voltaic Motivator here is because resource optimization canticles gives us a bit more breathing room and more flexibility into the build. If we then increase our charges to 5, we now have the ability to have 30 seconds of Voltaic Motivator up, which in times where we have no more ammo and we need to go into melee, having 30 seconds of 15% attack speed is really good. So how it works is you activate Voltaic Emitter the first time. That's 15 seconds that you have for 15% attack speed. Let's say your Galvanic Rifle has no more ammo. Then, because you have 2 charges left from Redline Capacitor, you can activate it again once the buff is run out to then reapply Voltaic Motivator for another 15 seconds of attack speed. So this balances out the build a little bit so that you aren't leaning too heavy on your range damage. And the Galvanic Rifle will suffer ammo problems. I've played a few Havoc 40 games already, and there are times where I'm just completely dry. So yeah, this is the main 2 parts of the engine that loop with each other, and you can apply this to most every other weapon. The higher the finesse multiplier, the better. So something like a revolver could also work with this. But this is a very interesting loop that I was playing around with when I first started playing with the Skitarii. So the remainder of the talent points will go into filling up the rest of the build. For our Blitz, an important one is Artificer Servo Skull. This is a very important note that you must pick up because it helps make the build more consistent when it comes to dealing with crushers. Obviously, since you're here, you must also take Medicaid Servo Skull. This is a very good piece of utility. But if you don't want to take this and you want to move the point elsewhere, that's fine. But it's really good utility to take. The remaining 13 points will be shoved into the right side where all the range focus trees go. So we'll pick up Binary Ballistics Protocol. We'll take Mobian Conductor. This again gives us a massive 15% damage buff when we activate our Voltaic Emitter. So now we have 10% from here, 10% from here, 15% from here. That's 45%, no, that's 35% damage we're getting from activating our buffs, which allows us to deal those very hard-hitting numbers. We'll then also take Superior Defense Engram. This is very good for our toughness regen and stacks very well with auto repair doctrines. We will also want the Ammo Aura. We want to take Ammo Cell Augury for 25% ammo reserves. And to pair with that, we want Galvanic Marking Array and Ammunition Restoration Pod. So Ammo Cell Augury, Restoration Pod, and Deposits ensures that we always restore 1 ammo every 15 seconds. I've done the math in my other video before, and I think technically even without ammunition deposit, it should still work. But we take this because the Governing Rifle really needs more ammo. But as long as you have at least 100 maximum ammo, so that means your magazine ammo plus your reserves, you should regenerate 1 ammo at the minimum every 15 seconds. Because if you don't, then the ammo will be rounded down and carried over to the next 15 seconds, which means, in other words, it will take you 30 seconds to regenerate 1 ammo, which is way too long. So where we can, we want to increase our maximum ammo capacity as much as possible, trying to reach 100. We're also going to take Gunsmith, mainly for the reload speed increase. The Galvanic Rifle has a pretty slow reload of 3.85 seconds, so we want to do our best to reload to lower that to increase our sustained damage output. We'll also take Assassination Protocols for the plus 25% damage against Ogrin. This is essentially another tier 4 perk for Crushers, which works very well. We'll then want to take Reactor Coil Recharge. This gives us 2% capacitance with every weak spot kill. 2% is about 1 second cooldown with every kill, and when we are going into melee, especially with our Transonic Blades with Savage Sweep, we will be getting our cooldowns back quite quickly. So our melee is also to sustain our anti-tank capabilities. I'm also going to take Sure Shot Cogitator Sync. Now, if you've watched my video, my early theory crafting video, you would know I pointed this out as a tax node. And in my opinion, it still is a tax node, but it really depends on the weapon. So, for example, the Galvanic Rifle has a weak spot multiplier of 2.2. That 2.2 multiplier translates to this node giving you about 14% damage. 14% damage is the same as this. So in that case, this node is as good as having another of these nodes, which is very, very nice. On weapons that have a lower value finesse multiplier, it's going to be around 9%, maybe even less than 9% at times. At that point, it's kind of a toss-up already. But yeah, for the Governing Rifle, this node helps a lot. The other 2 points are going to go into Augmented Power Cycle. This is a really good node. People should be taking this up a lot because this effectively cuts down your cooldown per charge from 50 seconds to 33 seconds. That's a 17-second cooldown reduction, and it helps so much in maintaining your ability to use Voltaic Emitter. So even at times where it's not safe for you to go into melee or you need to focus on sniping things, then this will just passively get your charges back quicker. The last point I'm going to put into this build, and I've played around with this one a lot, is Rad Sync. Rad Sync to me kind of works like a second opening salvo. This one won't work if you're using a very high fire rate or going full auto or just spam firing. But if you are taking precision shots, which you should be with the Galvanic Rifle, Rad Sync more often than not will give you at least 10% more damage, which is basically, well, not basically, it's kind of like half an opening salvo. Opening salvo gives you 20% strength. This gives you 10% more damage. Not exactly the same, not exactly the same in terms of value, but it's passive and it can stack up a bit more. The other considerations I did make was that instead of Rad Sync, I took superior tracking litanies. I want this mainly for the minus 30% spread because sometimes I really do like firing my rifle from the hip. That's also a consideration you can make, but if you want more damage, Rad Sync is a good choice. Works perfectly well with how you want to play this build and the Galvanic Rifle. This is the entire talent build. Now to move on to some strategy. With the talent build complete, you now have the blueprints to put together the anti-tank ranger build. All that is left is to give you some advice and tips on how to use this build effectively. As I've demonstrated in the beginning of the video, even if you aren't at your peak, you are still a formidable anti-tank destroyer. The core of that is making sure some of your key buffs remain active, specifically keeping redline capacitors at 3 stacks and above to maintain capacitory limit override for the 15% rending. This means you'll want to ensure that you are at least always generating capacitance and spending it periodically. Different stacks of Voltaic Emitter will also benefit you differently. One stack of Voltaic Emitter is enough to help you reach the 2-shot threshold for crushers as long as they are hit by the shockwave and the arc lightning. 2 stacks will give you the added attack speed bonus from Voltaic Motivator. This is when you are most lethal in melee combat. 3 stacks is where your true anti-tank capabilities are unlocked, because for the next 15 seconds, every shot from your Galvanic Rifle also applies brittleness, allowing you to tear through armored units that weren't affected by the initial shockwave and arc lightning. These are the different layers of effectiveness you can bring to the table, so keep that in mind. Don't feel like you always have to be at 3 charges before you can use your ability. The last tip I have for you is to actively use your Servo Skull to mark crushers before you snipe them down. The reason why I placed so much emphasis on the Servo Skull Blitz is that every shot from it applies a debuff that can cause enemies to take 15% more damage from all sources. This can reliably help you bridge the gap when trying to go for the 3-shot kills on crushers. Use it as your spotter when you don't want to spend charges on Voltaic Emitter, or if you want to accumulate more charges. Alright, that's it for my first build for the Skitarii. I have been fixated on putting this one together, and now that the video is complete, I can move on to experimenting with other things. This build is not meta, if you can even call anything meta this early on, but its performance is solid, and it definitely carries its own weight where it counts. This build is certainly a bit more mechanically demanding because you have to juggle several roles and timings to make the most out of it, but that will come with practice and experience. If you've enjoyed watching this build guide, consider dropping a like. If you want to follow along for more tips, tricks, deep dives, and guides, then consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.